It began not with a sound, but with the theft of it. Every city has a pulse, a low-frequency hum that works its way into your bones. It's a soundscape I've spent my life archiving, dissecting, and understanding. It's the sound of a city breathing. That morning, the city was holding its breath. I woke up because the silence was a pressure against my eardrums, a deep, abyssal quiet that felt fundamentally wrong. My first thought, hazy with sleep, was that my ears had finally given out. A professional hazard for an audio archivist who spends too many hours under the tight clamp of studio headphones. I sat up, my joints cracking in the stillness. The sound unnaturally loud in my small apartment. My gaze drifted to the window, and the thought of deafness was instantly, utterly erased by a new and impossible reality. It was snowing. In the middle of a July heat wave, with the air thick enough to drink and the AC units of the entire city rattling in protest, it was snowing. Except it wasn't snow. Snow has a crisp, clean whiteness. This was the flat, lifeless gray of old embers. A fine, uniform powder coated everything outside my window. The broad leaves of the old oak tree in the courtyard, the tar-papered roof of the corner deli, the hood of my neighbor's ridiculously oversized pickup truck. All of it was draped in a smooth, seamless blanket of pale ash. There were no drifts, no clumps. It looked as if a god had taken a giant sifter and dusted the entire world in the cremated remains of a dead star. My phone, lying on the bedside table, was the only thing that made a sound. A single, crisp notification chime that cut through the silence like a shard of glass. It was from the emergency alert system. I swiped it open, my thumb feeling clumsy and loud. E as alert, atmospheric contaminant warning. A fine particulate of unknown origin has been registered over the tri-state area. Initial analysis is inconclusive. For your safety, please remain indoors. Seal all windows and exterior vents. Avoid all physical contact with the particulate matter. Further updates will be provided. I read it twice. Particulate of unknown origin. The language was so sterile, so bureaucratic, that it was almost calming. This was a chemical spill then. Some industrial accident. A factory up the coast had blown its top and showered us with, what? Volcanic ash? Powdered waste? It was strange, but it was a category of strange I could understand. It had a box I could put it in. I shuffled into my living room, my bare feet unnervingly loud on the hardwood floor. The room was my sanctuary and my workshop, dominated by shelves of vinyl records, towers of restored reel-to-reel machines, and the sleek, modern curve of my digital audio workstation. A pair of high-fidelity studio monitors stood like silent sentinels on either side of my desk. This was my world, the careful preservation of sound. Outside, the ash continued its silent, impossible descent. It wasn't falling so much as just appearing, the air thickening with a gray haze that seemed to coalesce on surfaces. The morning sun struggled to pierce through it, casting the world in a dreary, monochromatic twilight. My phone buzzed again, this time with the frantic energy of the neighborhood group chat. The messages were a torrent of confusion and bad jokes. You guys seeing this? It's all over my car. My daughter thinks it's snow. She wants to go build a snowman. Wildfire smoke from Canada, maybe? This is nuts. Seriously, though, what is this stuff? My dog won't even step on the lawn. Someone posted a video. Their shaky phone camera was pointed at a small sparrow that had landed on an ash-covered railing. It hopped twice, leaving tiny, perfect tracks in the powder. Then it ruffled its feathers, trying to shake the dust from its wings. The gray particles clung to it, refusing to be dislodged. The bird chirped, a sharp, irritated sound before taking flight. I watched it go, a dusty little silhouette against a dusty gray sky. It seemed fine. I spent the next hour doing what the alert said. I checked the seals on my windows, stuffing a towel under the crack beneath my front door. The air in my apartment had a faint, dry smell, like a cold fireplace. Chalky. I kept glancing outside, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The world looked like a photograph drained of all its color. It was still so quiet. The usual 6 a.m. garbage truck hadn't come. The rumbling start of the first city buses was absent. The symphony was dead. My professional curiosity began to override my fear. This silence was a phenomenon, an acoustic event unlike any I had ever experienced. I powered up my workstation, the low hum of the cooling fans a comfort in the oppressive quiet. I unhooked one of my shotgun microphones, a highly sensitive device capable of capturing a whisper from 50 yards away. Placing its stand by the slightly open balcony door, a breach of protocol I immediately regretted but couldn't resist, I pointed it towards the street below. I slipped on my headphones, cranked the preamp gain, and I listened. At first, there was nothing. Just the low hiss of amplification, the sound of a world switched off. I nudged the gain higher, pushing the equipment to its limits, the hiss growing louder in my ears. I was about to give up, to dismiss it as nothing, when I caught it. Faint, almost imperceptible. A sound buried deep beneath the noise floor. It wasn't a hum or a tone. It was a soft, dry, shifting sound, like sand trickling through a million tiny hourglasses, or the rustle of dry leaves, except there was no wind. It was the sound of the ash itself. It was the sound of a billion microscopic particles settling. And it was constant, a baseline of granular decay. I shivered, though the room was not cold. The sound was wrong. It felt ancient, hungry. That's when I heard the jays. Their shrieking started suddenly, a harsh, grating tearing of the silence. A pair of blue jays nested in the old oak, and they were notoriously loud and territorial. Amplified through my microphone was jarring, painfully sharp. I saw them through the window, two large crested birds hopping angrily on an ash-laden branch, protesting this violation of their world. They were making a mistake, a terrible, fatal mistake. I was still listening through the headphones, my eyes fixed on the tree. As the jays continued their racket, the sound I was hearing began to change. The soft, granular rustle of the ash intensified. It grew in volume, taking on a new texture, a rhythmic quality. It sounded less like settling and more like concentrating. I watched, mesmerized with horror, as the thick layer of ash on the main trunk of the tree began to move. It wasn't sliding off, it was flowing, swirling in on itself like iron filings drawn to a magnet. It gathered into a single roiling mound, a churning tumor of gray dust that pulsed in time with the jays' frantic calls. The soft rustling in my ears was now a harsh, crackling hiss, an audio distortion that grew sharper and more defined with every shriek. The mound began to rise. It pulled itself up from the trunk, defying gravity, a shapeless mass of swirling particles that started to elongate to form appendages. It was sculpting itself. The jays, sensing a threat they couldn't possibly comprehend, grew even louder, their cries becoming squawks of alarm. The ashen thing on the trunk responded, its form sharpening. It sprouted a pair of crude, tattered wings and a jagged protuberance that looked like a monstrous beak. It was a mockery of a bird, a three-dimensional shadow made of dust and malice. Then it made a sound. Through my headphones, a new noise joined the shrieking of the real jays. It was a recording, a distorted, granulated echo of their own calls. Jay, Jay, but broken, looped, filled with static and the dry hiss of its own substance. The ashen creature, this echo, was learning. It was mimicking. One of the real jays, perhaps emboldened by the familiar sound, took a short, aggressive flight towards the thing. It was halfway there when the echo lunged. It didn't fly. It launched itself from the tree trunk in a silent, impossibly fast arc. The two shapes, one of feather and bone, the other of pure dust, collided in midair. There was no struggle. No flutter of wings. The moment the echo touched the jay, the bird just dissolved. Its form collapsed inwards, its frantic cry cut off in a wet, choked gurgle. The blue and white feathers, the flesh, the very substance of it seemed to disintegrate, turning into a small, dark cloud that was instantly absorbed into the gray mass of the echo. The ashen monster landed softly on the branch, now slightly larger, its form a little more defined. It turned its crude head towards the remaining jay, which was frozen in terror. It opened its ashen beak, and from it came the perfected, stolen shriek of its fallen comrade. A perfect, clear, piercing call. It was a lure. The second bird broke its paralysis and fled, streaking away into the gray sky. The echo watched it go, its head cocked. Then slowly, as if the energy holding it together was fading, its form began to soften. The sharp edges of its beak and wings rounded off, and the entire creature seemed to melt, flowing back down to merge with the thick layer of ash on the tree, becoming indistinguishable from it once more. Silence returned, a heavier, more menacing silence than before. I tore the headphones from my head, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath was coming in ragged, shallow gasps. What had I just seen? What in God's name had I just witnessed? It wasn't a chemical spill. It wasn't an industrial accident. This ash, this thing, it was alive. It was a predator that hunted with sound. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely operate my computer mouse. I dragged the audio file I had been recording into my editing software. I needed to see it to confirm it wasn't a hallucination. The waveform scrolled across my screen. I could see it all laid out, the clean, sharp peaks of the J's initial calls, then the rising noise floor, the hiss of the ash awakening. And there it was, a new set of peaks, muddy and distorted at first, but slowly sharpening, overlaying the original audio, the mimicry, the ghost in the machine. My phone screamed. It wasn't the polite chime from before. It was the raw, brutal shriek of the emergency alert system, a sound designed to jolt a person from the deepest sleep straight into a state of panic. I snatched it up, my blood running cold. The screen was a stark, terrifying red. EAS Extreme Alert. Do not make a sound. The particulate is photoreactive. It is drawn to and mimics sound. Silence is survival. I repeat, silence is survival. The words blurred. Photoreactive. A word I'd never heard before, but I knew with chilling certainty exactly what it meant. I had just witnessed its definition. I stared at the message, then back out the window at the peaceful, deadly gray landscape. Every car horn, every shouting voice, every crying child was now a dinner bell. Every sound was a death sentence. Our entire world, a world built on noise and communication, had just become a minefield. I stood there, frozen. For how long, I don't know. My mind was racing, cataloging every potential sound in my apartment. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the drip of a leaky faucet. Each one was a potential threat, a beacon in the dark. I needed to unplug everything. I needed to be absolutely silent. I was about to move, to begin the methodical process of silencing my entire life when a new sound cut through the air from the street below. It was music. Loud, obnoxious, bass-heavy, hip-hop blasting from a car stereo. It was the sound of a normal Tuesday morning for some people, a sound I'd normally curse for waking me up. But now, it was the most terrifying sound I could possibly imagine. I crept to the window, my body screaming at me not to look. Down on the street, my neighbor's kid, a college student named Josh, who treated his beat-up hatchback like it was a main stage speaker, had just gotten into his car. He was clearly ignoring the alerts, or perhaps he hadn't seen them. The music pulsed from the vehicle, the bass vibrating through the very concrete of my building. Thump, 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 thump. He hadn't started the engine yet. He was just sitting there, scrolling on his phone, cocooned in his world of oblivious noise. And all around his car, on the street, on the sidewalks, on the walls of the surrounding buildings, the ash was beginning to stir. It wasn't just one mound this time. From every surface, the gray dust was coalescing. Dozens of small rivulets of ash flowed from the walls and rooftops, converging on the street. The ground around the hatchback was becoming a churning, swirling sea of gray. It was rising, thickening, pulling itself upwards into a colossal, vaguely humanoid shape. It was 10 feet tall, then 20. A featureless giant of roiling dust, its form pulsing in time with the deep, rhythmic bass of the music. Josh didn't notice. He was still looking at his phone, head bopping to the beat. The giant echo, a monster born of pure sound, raised a colossal club-like arm. It was still forming, still gathering mass, but it was already a titan. I wanted to scream, to shout a warning, to bang on the glass. But the alert on my phone burned in my mind. Silence is survival. A single cry from me would only create another monster, another echo born from my own panic. I could only watch. Down below, the ashen giant solidified its shape. It took a slow, ponderous step towards the hatchback, the movement utterly silent, a terrifying contrast to the blaring music that was giving it life. Josh finally looked up from his phone, his face betraying a flicker of annoyance, probably wondering what was casting such a large shadow over his car on this strange, overcast day. His eyes widened, his jaw dropped, the music stopped, but it was too late. The echo was already made, and it was hungry. The silence that followed the music's abrupt cutoff was more terrifying than the noise itself. For a single, stretched second, the world held its breath. The giant echo, born of bass and rhythm, stood motionless over the hatchback, a colossal monument of ash. Josh was a silhouette behind the glass, his face a pale mask of disbelief. He had killed the sound, and for a moment, I think he believed it had saved him. He was wrong. The echo wasn't powered by the sound, it was imprinted by it. The music was its genesis, its DNA. Now its sole purpose was to find and erase the source. It moved with a dreadful, silent fluidity. The massive arm, the one that had been raised to strike, descended. It didn't smash. It simply pressed. I heard, even through my sealed window, the protesting groan of the car's frame as the roof began to buckle. The sound of tortured metal was a sharp, tearing cry in the quiet air, and the world answered. From the surface of the giant echo itself, a smaller, more jagged shape tore loose. An echo of the groan, a screeching, twisting creature of ash that slammed itself against the driver's side window. The glass didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed with a million cracks. A sound like a forest of ice cracking all at once. That sound, in turn, birthed a swarm of smaller, chittering echoes that swarmed over the vehicle, their ashen bodies pulsing with the stolen sound of fracturing glass. It was a cascade, a symphony of destruction where every new note created a new, monstrous musician. The main echo continued its inexorable pressure. The hatchback flattened, its frame collapsing as if it were made of tin foil. I saw Josh's shape disappear in the wreckage. I prayed it was quick. I prayed he didn't scream. A scream would have been the worst sound of all. The giant creature, its purpose fulfilled, began to lose cohesion. It crumbled, its form collapsing back into a massive, inert pile of dust on top of the crushed vehicle. The smaller echoes, born of the destruction, scurried over the wreckage before they too dissolved, melting back into the gray landscape. All that was left was the crushed metal coffin of the hatchback, half buried in a mountain of fine, pale ash, and a new sound. From the pile, a faint, rhythmic ghost of the hip-hop song began to play, a distorted, looping fragment of the bass line, a sound beacon, a tombstone that sang of its own creation. I backed away from the window, my legs weak, and collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor. My throat was raw, but I had made no sound. I was a prisoner, not just in my apartment, but in my own body, which suddenly felt like a machine of terrifying potential noise. A cough, a sneeze, a stumble, any of them could be my executioner. Slowly, deliberately, I began to move. My first act was to take off my t-shirt and tear it into strips. I patted my bare feet with them, muffling my steps. Every movement was a calculation. I slid rather than walked, my hand braced against the wall for balance. The hardwood floor, my beautiful polished floor, was now a treacherous landscape of groans and creaks. I learned its geography in minutes, mapping the silent spots. The refrigerator in the kitchen was next. Its gentle hum, once a comforting sound of domestic life, was now a low, continuous growl that grated on my nerves. It was a constant broadcast. I am here. I am running. I am a target. Getting to it was a journey. The linoleum in the kitchen was cold under my padded feet. I held my breath as I reached behind it, my fingers fumbling for the plug. The silence when I pulled it, when the compressor's hum died with a final, soft sigh, was a relief so profound it almost made me weep. One by one, I silenced my world. The digital clocks, the computer servers, the backup power supplies, anything with a fan, a speaker, or a motor. I was an audio archivist performing the ultimate act of deletion, erasing the soundtrack of my own life, until all that was left was the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. I established a base camp in my studio, the most soundproofed room in the apartment. I dragged my mattress in, the soft scraping sound against the floor making my skin crawl. I sat there in the dark, my back against the acoustic foam panels, and I listened. I put my headphones back on, connecting them to the shotgun microphone, which was still pointed like a silent cannon out the balcony door. The world it revealed to me was a waking nightmare. The dominant sound was the ghost beat from Josh's wreck. But underneath it, other sounds were now audible. From a few blocks over, the looped, frantic barking of a dog. In another direction, a high-pitched electronic cry, a smoke alarm, perhaps, from a kitchen fire that would now burn itself out unattended. And beneath it all, that dry, granular hiss of the ash, which seemed louder now, more alert, as if it were actively listening. My phone screen lit up, the neighborhood group chat. For hours, it had been as silent as the city. Now, a single message appeared. It was from Mrs. Gable, the retired teacher who lived on the 4th floor. Did anyone see the boy with the car? My fingers trembled as I typed, my screen taps feeling like hammer blows. I had to reply, yes, stay inside, make no noise. Whatever you do, do not make any noise. The replies came in a flood of silent panic. My God, I saw it too, from my kitchen window. The alert is real. It's the sound. Oh God, it's the sound. My baby is sleeping. What happens if he wakes up? What happens if he cries? That last message from a young woman named Chloe in the apartment next to mine sent a spear of ice through my heart. A baby's cry. High-pitched, piercing, impossible to ignore. A sound designed by nature to demand a response. What kind of echo would that create? My mind recoiled from the image. We talked for hours, our silent screams confined to the blue and gray bubbles of the chat window. We were a community of ghosts, haunting our own homes. We pieced together what we knew. The ash had fallen everywhere. The phenomenon wasn't just our neighborhood, it was the entire city. One person, a man named Mark, who lived in the building opposite mine, said he had a view of the main road. He described it as a graveyard. Cars were stopped everywhere, and between them, the echoes. Ashen statues, frozen in place, each emitting their own quiet, looping dirge. He said some looked like people. Hard knows we were sharing information, trying to build a plan, when a new complication arose in my own silent sanctuary. Drip. It was so quiet I almost missed it. A single, soft, perfectly formed sound from the corner of my studio. Drip. My blood ran cold. The ensuite bathroom, the faucet on the sink, it had been acting up for weeks. A slow, steady leak that I had ignored. Drip. I focused the entire force of my attention on it. It was a clean, resonant sound. A tiny, percussive beat in the heart of my silent world. Each drop hitting the porcelain of the basin felt like a drumbeat, a signal, a countdown. I imagined the ash outside, its countless particles vibrating in sympathy with that tiny, rhythmic impact. I pictured it flowing like a gray sludge under my front door, through the vents, seeking the source. Would it form in the hallway, or would it find a way into my bathroom, creating a small, pulsing, dripping echo right here in my sanctuary? I had to stop it. The journey from my studio to the bathroom was the longest 10 feet of my life. I had left my toolbox in the kitchen. I moved with agonizing slowness, my padded feet making the faintest whisper on the floor. The looping ghost of the hip-hop beat from outside seemed to mock my stealth. In the kitchen, I opened the utility drawer. The metallic slide of the bearings was a screech in the quiet. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the endless, dreadful loop from the street. I sifted through the tools, my fingers closing around the cold, heavy form of a wrench. The faint clink of metal on metal as I lifted it made me flinch. Holding the wrench in a white-knuckled grip, I made the journey back. The bathroom was dark. I didn't dare turn on the light. The click of the switch was a risk I couldn't take. Moonlight filtered through the gray, ashen sky provided a dim illumination. And there it was. The tap. A single fat drop of water hung from its spout, shimmering. I watched it swell, detach, and fall. Drip. The sound was louder in here, amplified by the tiled walls. I had to be precise. One loud clang of the wrench against the pipe, one dropped tool, and it would all be over. My hands were slick with sweat. I positioned the wrench around the hexagonal nut at the base of the tap. I held my breath, closed my eyes, and began to turn. My muscles screamed with the effort of moving so slowly. The nut was stiff. It resisted. I applied more pressure, my knuckles turning white. A low groan, the sound of oxidized metal surrendering, echoed in the small room. I froze again, my heart in my throat. I waited. 1 second. 2. 10. Nothing. I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I gave the wrench one final, powerful, silent turn. The dripping stopped. The silence that rushed back in was beautiful. It was the most perfect, wonderful sound I had ever heard. I sagged against the wall, the wrench heavy in my hand, my body trembling with the release of tension. I had done it. I had won. I stood there for a long time, just basking in the quiet, the safety of it. My fortress was secure again. I felt a flicker of hope, the first since I'd seen the Jays. Maybe we could survive this. We just had to be quiet. We just had to wait. Eventually, I made my way back to the studio, my throne room of silence. I sat down, picking up my headphones to once again listen to the dead world outside. I needed to know if anything had changed. I slipped them over my ears. The familiar, looped horrors were still there. The bass line, the barking, the smoke alarm. But as I adjusted the gain, I caught something new, a sound that wasn't a loop, a sound that was fresh and real and terrifyingly close. It was a soft, rhythmic scraping, coming from the hallway just outside my apartment. My heart seized. It was the sound of something being dragged, something heavy. It was followed by a soft, wet, tearing sound, and then a faint, muffled thump. I strained to listen, trying to make sense of it. It sounded like someone was barricading a door. And then I heard the whisper. It was faint, distorted by the thick wood of my front door, but it was unmistakably human, a woman's voice, raw with panic. Almost there. Mark, is the wedge in place? I can't hold it for much longer. A second voice answered, a man's, a low and urgent whisper. It's in. Let go slowly. The scraping stopped. I heard a soft shuffle of feet. Then a heavier thump, as if someone had slumped against the wall right outside my apartment. My entire body was rigid. Who was out there? Survivors? It had to be Mark from the building opposite, but how had they gotten here? How had they crossed the street, that open graveyard, without making a sound loud enough to create an echo? The whispers were too quiet to make out clearly. They were panicked, ragged. I heard a soft sob, quickly muffled. They were right there. Just a few inches of wood and drywall separated us. They were alive. My question was answered a moment later. A new sound began. It was not a whisper. It was not a scrape. It was a gentle, deliberate, rhythmic tapping, and it was coming from my front door. Tap, tap, tap. It was a sound of invitation, a sound of civility. In the world before, it meant a visitor, a friend, a delivery. In this new silent world, it could only mean one of two things. It was either a desperate soul seeking sanctuary, or it was a monster that had learned a new and terrible song. My world shrank to the dimensions of my front door. 3 square meters of reinforced wood and steel that had, until this moment, felt like the wall of a fortress. Now, it felt as thin as paper. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was impossibly soft, the gentle percussion of a single knuckle on wood. It was a sound of reason, of calm communication. And that's what made it so terrifying. The echoes I had heard were creatures of raw, looping noise, mindless and chaotic. This was controlled. This was intelligent. My first instinct was to freeze, to become another piece of furniture and pray it went away. But the whispers I'd heard, they were real. The panic was real. My eyes darted to my phone, still clutched in my hand. The group chat was my only weapon. My fingers, slick with sweat, flew across the screen, each tap a tiny internal explosion of sound. Mark, is that you? Are you at my door? 3B. I hit send and my breath hitched in my throat. I stared at the door, half expecting it to splinter inwards. The tapping stopped. A new message appeared on my screen almost instantly. It was from Mark. Julian, thank God. Yes, it's us. Me and Sarah from 2A. We're outside your door. We had to run. Sarah, the nurse who lived below me. I remembered her from the building's summer barbecue, quiet, competent, with tired eyes. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. But it was followed by a cold wave of dread. Run from what? Another message from Mark. Can you let us in? Please. We can't stay in the hall. Something is in the stairwell. Something in the stairwell. The words hung in the air. Letting them in was a risk. The sound of the locks, the creak of the door, it could be a beacon. But leaving them out there was a death sentence. For them, and potentially for me, if whatever was in the stairwell found them camped outside my apartment. I typed back, my mind racing. Stand by. Do not make a sound. I have to be quiet. I crept to the door, my padded feet making no noise. I had 3 locks, a deadbolt, a chain, and a key lock in the knob. Each one was a different acoustic challenge. I placed my ear against the cold wood, listening. I could hear their breathing, ragged and shallow. They were there. They were real. Okay, Julian. An audio problem. Deconstruct it. The deadbolt was the loudest. A heavy, resonant clack. The knob lock was quieter, a series of smaller clicks. The chain would be a metallic whisper. I had to muffle them. I slid back to the living room, grabbing the thickest blanket off my couch. Moving with the slowness of a bomb disposal expert, I returned to the door and draped the heavy fabric over the entire lock mechanism, pressing it tight against the wood with my body. It wasn't soundproofing, but it would dampen the sharp, transient sounds that the ash seemed to love. I typed a message with one hand, my body pressed against the door. Getting ready. When the door opens, come in fast and low. Bring whatever you have. Do not speak. A reply from Sarah. Understood. I took a deep, silent breath. My hand went under the blanket. My fingers found the thumb turn of the deadbolt. I wrapped my other hand around it, squeezing, trying to absorb the vibration. I turned it, not with a quick snap, but with a slow, agonizing grind. The bolt withdrew with a low, muffled groan of metal on metal. I froze, listened. Nothing but the ever-present ghost beat from the street. Next, the knob lock. A series of soft, oily clicks under the blanket. Easy. Finally, the chain. I slid the metal nub along its track, my fingers guiding it to prevent any clinking. It was the quietest of all. The door was unlocked. I sent the final message. Now! I pulled the handle. The door swung inward with a faint, breathy whoosh. Two figures stumbled in from the darkened hallway, moving in a low crouch. Mark, a big, burly man who worked in construction, and Sarah, smaller, more wiry, clutching a bulging first aid kit to her chest. They spilled onto my floor, and I immediately swung the door shut behind them, the latch clicking into place with a sound that made all three of us flinch. I didn't bother relocking it yet. The danger was already inside with us. We stayed there for a full minute, a silent tableau in the gloom, listening. The hallway remained quiet. Whatever was in the stairwell had not heard us. Slowly, we retreated to the relative safety of my studio. Mark slumped against a wall, his head in his hands, his broad shoulders trembling. Sarah sank to the floor, her back to my record shelves, and methodically began checking the contents of her kit, her hands moving with a practiced calm that was at odds with the terror in her eyes. I handed her my phone, and she typed out their story, while Mark tried to compose himself. They had been in his apartment when the power had flickered. It came back on, but the brief outage had caused his television to reboot to its factory settings at full volume. The blaring, cheerful welcome chime had been a death knell. Before he could even lunge for the plug, the ash in his living room, sucked in through a faulty windowsill, had begun to stir. They had fled, grabbing only Sarah's kit, and had seen it, the echo of the chime, a small, shimmering, vaguely bird-like thing made of churning dust, already forming near the TV. The stairwell had been their only escape route, and that's where they saw it. On the landing below, an echo of a person was lying on the ground. It was Mrs. Gable's husband, from his heart medication alarm that must have gone off. The echo was a perfect statue of him, clutching his chest, emitting a faint, looping beep. But another sound was there, too, a fire alarm from somewhere in the building. As they watched from above, the blaring shriek of the fire alarm echo, a formless, screaming vortex of ash, had descended the stairs. It didn't attack the beeping statue. It flowed over it, absorbing it. The two sounds had merged into a new, terrifying hybrid, a shrieking vortex that now also beeped with a dying man's last moments. The echoes were evolving, merging. They had scrambled up the stairs to my floor, the shrieking horror close behind, and had managed to drag a heavy filing cabinet in front of the stairwell door, barricading it just before the thing reached them. Then they had come to my door. Their story left me cold. This wasn't just a reactive phenomenon. It was a hostile ecosystem, and the predators were learning to cooperate. "We can't stay separated," Mark finally whispered, his voice raspy. "The power grid will fail for good. The cell towers will go down. We'll be cut off. We'll be picked off one by one." He was right. Our silent digital community was a temporary comfort. We needed a real-world plan. Sarah looked up from her phone, where she'd been messaging the others. "Mrs. Gable is a diabetic. Her insulin needs to be refrigerated. She's on her last pen. Chloe's baby, he's running out of formula." The needs were piling up. Food, water, medicine. A ticking clock had been placed on our survival. "The corner deli," I whispered, the words feeling foreign and loud in my own mouth. "It has all of that." Mark looked at me, his face grim. "It's 50 yards away, Julian, across an open courtyard filled with that stuff. We saw two echoes just crossing the street, one of a cat that must have been yowling, another from a bicycle bell. It's a minefield." "But we don't have to go in blind," I said, a desperate idea forming in my mind. My gaze fell upon my workstation, my microphones, my headphones. "You got across the street. How?" "We moved slow," Sarah whispered. "No sudden noises. We noticed the echoes didn't seem to react to the sound of our breathing or the soft scuff of our shoes as long as it was quiet. They hunt sharp sounds, sudden changes in the acoustic environment." "Exactly," I said, my pulse quickening. "They are reactive, but they have a trigger threshold. I can map that threshold. I can listen to the courtyard. I can tell you where the echoes are, what their sound loops are. I can find the quietest path between them. I can be your ears." A new kind of silence fell over the room, the silence of a crazy, impossible plan taking root. We weren't just hiding anymore. We were fighting back, using the enemy's own nature against it. We spent the next hour planning, our conversation a rapid-fire exchange of whispered text messages. Mrs. Gable confirmed she had about 24 hours of insulin left before it became critical. Chloe said her baby Leo was getting fussy. The urgency was a physical weight. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Mark and Sarah, the two bravest among us, would make the run. I would be their guide from my studio. We established a set of simple text signals: go, stop, danger, left, right. It was clumsy, but it was all we had. They prepared. They patted the soles of their shoes with more cloth. They removed anything that might jingle or rustle. They emptied their pockets. They became as silent as humanly possible. Mark found a crowbar in my toolbox, wrapping the handle in cloth, a silent weapon just in case. I sat at my station, pointing my shotgun microphone towards the courtyard that separated our building from the row of shops on the other side. Through my headphones, the courtyard came alive. It was worse than the street. I could hear the faint looping melody of an ice cream truck, the phantom laughter of children, the hiss of a dropped soda can. It was an audio graveyard of a summer afternoon that had been brutally interrupted. I began mapping it, sketching a crude layout of the courtyard on a piece of paper, marking the locations of the sound sources with an X. There was a path, a narrow, winding channel between the ice cream truck echo and the laughing children echo. It was tight. It was risky. But it was there. I gave them the signal. They were ready. Mark and Sarah stood by my apartment door, two silent soldiers about to step onto the battlefield. Mark gave me a single, determined nod. Sarah gave a thumbs up, her face pale but resolved. I looked at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. "Hallway is clear," I typed. "Go now. Good luck." I watched them on the small security feed monitor I had of the hallway. The door opened with a barely audible sigh. They slipped out, closing it gently behind them. They were shadows, moving with a grace born of pure terror. They were heading for the barricaded stairwell door, their route to the ground floor. I kept my headphones on, my ears focused on the hallway microphone's feed. I could hear the whisper of their clothes, the sound of their breathing. It was okay. The sounds were too soft, too organic. They reached the stairwell. Mark sent a text. "At the door. It's quiet." I typed back, "Proceed. I'm listening." They began to move the filing cabinet. The low, grating scrape of metal on concrete, even muffled by their careful movements, was a spike of anxiety in my chest. I held my breath, listening for any change, any sign that the ash was reacting. Nothing. They had done it. They were in the stairwell. I was about to send the next signal to tell them the courtyard was still clear when my ears were filled with a new sound. It wasn't from the courtyard. It wasn't from the hallway. It was from inside the building, from the apartment next to mine. It was real. It was piercing. And it was the one sound we had all been dreading. It was the sound of a baby crying. Leo was awake, and in the hallway through my microphone I heard a new noise, the soft, dry, unmistakable hiss of the ash beginning to stir. The first cry was a splinter of sound in the absolute quiet. My ears, hyper-attuned and amplified by the high-gain preamp, registered it with the force of a physical blow. For a horrifying second, my brain refused to process it, trying to file it away as another phantom, another recorded ghost. But there was no loop, no static. It was raw, real, and laced with the terrified panic of a baby who had woken up in a world that had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Leo was awake. Back! The word was not a sound I made, but a convulsion of my thumbs on the phone screen. A single frantic command sent to Mark. In my headphones, the baby's cry was joined by a new noise. The sound I had been dreading, the dry, hungry hiss of the ash in the hallway, awakening from its slumber. I saw them on the security feed. Mark and Sarah, frozen at the stairwell door. Mark's head snapped towards my apartment, his eyes wide with a question I had already answered. He grabbed Sarah's arm and they scrambled back, their silent, practiced movements dissolving into a clumsy, desperate retreat. The baby's cries grew louder, more frantic now. They were coming from Chloe's apartment, 3C, right next to mine. In the hallway, directly in front of her door, the smooth gray carpet of ash began to churn. It swirled like water going down a drain, pulling in on itself, thickening, rising. "It's forming," I typed, my fingers fumbling. "At Chloe's door. Move." They were almost at my door. Behind them, the mound of ash had already taken on a rudimentary shape. It was small, no bigger than a piece of luggage, and it was convulsing, pulsing in time with Leo's terrified wails. It was trying to form a shape it had never heard before, a sound of pure, helpless life. Mark reached my door and his hand slammed against it, a loud, flat thump of pure panic. A new, sharper hiss erupted from the forming echo as it reacted to the fresh sound. It began to stretch, to contort, pulling itself into a horrifying fetal shape, a hunched, vaguely infant-like creature of churning gray. I threw the locks, ignoring my own rules of silence. The heavy clack of the deadbolt was a gunshot. Mark and Sarah tumbled inside as the thing in the hall unfurled, rising on two malformed legs. I slammed the door shut just as it opened a gaping, soundless mouth and emitted its first stolen cry, a perfect, heartbreaking, looped replica of Leo's wail, but filled with the dry, rasping static of the ash. The three of us stood in the entryway, our chests heaving, listening to the nightmare outside our door, the wailing echo. It was there now, a permanent fixture in our hallway, a tiny, monstrous sentry that would forever cry with a stolen voice, pacing back and forth in front of Chloe's door. The mission was a catastrophic failure. Despair was a physical poison. In the group chat, Chloe was a wreck. "I'm so sorry. Oh God, I'm so sorry. He just woke up. I tried to keep him quiet. I'm sorry." We tried to reassure her, but the words felt hollow. It wasn't her fault. It was the fault of this new, impossible world that didn't allow for babies to cry, for people to be afraid, for life to make a sound. The reality of our situation crashed down on us. Mark paced my studio like a caged lion, his heavy, padded footfalls a rhythm of pure frustration. "We're trapped," he whispered, the sound a ragged edge of anger. "Completely and utterly trapped. That thing is in the hall. The other one is in the stairwell. We can't get out." "The clocks are still ticking," Sarah added, her voice dangerously calm. She was cleaning a small scrape on Mark's hand from their dive back inside. "Mrs. Gable's insulin. The formula. We lost our chance." I sat at my station, staring at the audio waveform of the wailing echo's cry on my screen. A perfect, repeating pattern of despair. Mark was right. We were trapped. The old plan, the plan of silence and stealth, was dead. The hallway was no longer a neutral space. It was a hunting ground, patrolled by a creature born of love and fear. Silence had failed us. So what was the alternative? The question looped in my mind, as relentless as the echoes outside. If silence is impossible, if the slightest mistake, the most human of sounds, can kill you, what's left? I looked at my equipment, at the amplifiers, the signal generators, the rows of effects processors. My whole life had been about capturing, shaping, and controlling sound. The ash reacted to sound. It was drawn to it. It was shaped by it. It followed rules, the rules of physics, the rules of acoustics. And rules can be manipulated. "Your plan was right, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We can't stay here, but the approach was wrong." He and Sarah stopped, looking at me. "We've been trying to be silent," I continued, the idea taking shape, wild and terrifying. "We've been trying to leave no acoustic footprint, but that's impossible. We're human. We make noise. So instead of trying to be silent, let's be loud." Mark stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Are you insane? You saw what happened to Josh with his car stereo." "Josh was chaotic," I countered, standing up, my energy returning. Uncontrolled, unpredictable sound. Bass, melody, vocals, percussion. A dozen different acoustic triggers creating a cascade of echoes. But what if the sound isn't chaotic? What if it's controlled? What if it's a single, pure, continuous tone? A sound so simple and so constant that the ash can only create one response, one echo, in one specific place. I pointed to the diagram of the courtyard still on my desk. "We can't sneak through the minefield, so let's give the mines a single, bigger target to hit. We create a lure, a sound beacon so powerful and so focused that it draws all the attention of the ash in the immediate area. It will be a feeding frenzy, but it will be a predictable one. And while the monster is feeding over there..." I drew a line on the paper with my finger. "We move over here. We don't sneak through the silence. We walk through the noise." I called it the sound bridge. The risk was astronomical. If I was wrong about the physics of it, we would be creating a monster that would not only kill us, but potentially doom the entire block. For 10 minutes, the three of us debated it in frantic, hushed whispers. But the logic, as terrifying as it was sound, and we were out of other options. The plan was refined. I had a small but powerful Bluetooth speaker. the kind you take to the beach. Its battery was still fully charged. I would connect it to my laptop and cue up the sound file, a pure, low-frequency sine wave at 40 hertz, a deep, steady hum that you would feel in your teeth. It was a clean, simple signal. Hopefully, it would create a clean, simple echo. The target was the dumpster at the far side of the courtyard. It was about 60 feet from our building's main entrance, far enough, I prayed, to draw the attention away from our path to the deli. Sarah, who had been a softball pitcher in high school, had the best arm. She would make the throw. The setup was another ballet of silent tension. We found the speaker. I powered it on, the cheerful little electronic chime making us all jump out of our skins. I paired it to my laptop with a muted curse. Sarah practiced the throwing motion in my living room, her body a coil of potential energy. Through the group chat, we informed the others. The response was a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Chloe's message was a single heartbreaking line. Please. Leo has nothing left. That was all the motivation we needed. Mark and Sarah stood at the door again. This time, there was no illusion of stealth. This was a brute force assault. I sat at my station, a grim-faced conductor about to start an orchestra of nightmares. Hallway window is our best bet, Mark whispered, referring to the large window at the end of the short corridor. Straight shot to the dumpster. The problem was the wailing echo, which was still pacing right outside Chloe's door, between us and the window. I have an idea, Sarah whispered back. She pointed to a small, hard rubber ball on one of my shelves, a stress relief toy. A distraction for the distraction. The plan had become terrifyingly complex. Step 1. Sarah would throw the rubber ball down the opposite end of the hallway to draw the wailing echo away. Step 2. While it was distracted, she would sprint to the hallway window, open it, and throw the speaker. Step 3. Mark and I would open my door for her to get back in. Step 4. I would hit play. It was a plan with a dozen points of failure. They slipped out into the hall. I watched on my monitor, my finger poised over the trackpad on my laptop. The wailing echo was there, a shuddering, knee-high horror, its looped cry a constant, grating sorrow. I saw Sarah's arm move. The small black ball flew through the air, landing with a soft but distinct thump at the far end of the corridor. The wailing echo stopped its pacing. Its head, a crude lump of dust, swiveled towards the new sound. It abandoned its post at Chloe's door and began to shamble towards the source of the thump. Now, Mark's voice was a ghost in the microphone feed. Sarah broke into a dead sprint. She reached the window, her hands fumbling with the latch. It swung open with a low groan. In the same motion, she brought her arm back and threw the speaker. It was a perfect, high arc, a dark shape against the gray sky. I saw it tumble end over end, disappearing from my monitor's view, but heading directly for the target. Sarah and Mark were already scrambling back to my door as the wailing echo, having found nothing at the end of the hall, turned back, its stolen cry seeming to rise in frustration. I threw the door open, they fell inside, and I slammed it shut. The speaker landed. I heard the faint, distant clatter of it hitting the metal side of the dumpster through my headphones. It was time. My hand was shaking. This was it. The point of no return. I took one last look at Mark and Sarah, their faces pale and expectant. I closed my eyes, and I clicked play. For a half second, nothing happened. Then a deep, powerful hum filled my headphones, emanating from the courtyard. A pure, clean, 40 hertz tone. The kind of sound that resonates deep in your chest cavity. It was working. I looked out the window. The effect was instantaneous, and it was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just the ash in the courtyard that reacted. It was all of it. From every direction, the ash began to move. From the street, from the rooftops, from the sides of buildings. It flowed in great gray rivers, all converging on the single point of sound by the dumpster. The small, scattered echoes of the courtyard, the ice cream truck, the laughing children, dissolved, their substance pulled into this new, greater vortex. The wailing echo in our hallway went rigid, then collapsed into a pile of dust that was sucked as if by a phantom vacuum under the crack of my door and out towards the courtyard. The hum was a siren song, and every particle of ash was answering its call. By the dumpster, a cyclone of gray dust was forming. It rose 20 feet, then 50, then 100. It was not a humanoid shape. It was not an animal. It was a pillar of pure, churning chaos, a tornado of sound and fury, a vast swirling vortex of dust, its core glowing with a faint internal energy. We had not created a simple lure. We had not built a bridge. We had summoned a god, a blind, deaf god of noise. And it was growing with every second, drawing in more of the city, becoming a monster that could devour the world. The path to the deli was clear, but we were frozen at the window, staring at the maelstrom we had unleashed. The pillar of chaos in the courtyard pulsed with the deep, steady heartbeat of the 40 hertz tone. It was a sight of such sublime cosmic horror that it seemed to paralyze the mind. For a long moment, the three of us could only stare, mesmerized by the monster we had midwifed into existence. It was beautiful, in the way a supernova is beautiful, an act of creation that is also an act of total annihilation. Mark was the first to break the spell. "My God, Julian," he breathed, his voice a reverent, terrified whisper. "What is that thing?" "It's our chance," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the awe. She didn't look away from the window, but her tone was sharp, pragmatic. "Look, it's completely focused. The rest of the courtyard is empty." She was right. The ground below, which moments before had been a minefield of audio phantoms, was now scoured clean. The ash that had once been the echo of an ice cream truck, of laughing children, of a bicycle bell, it had all been consumed, drawn into the singularity of the vortex. The path to the deli was a stretch of bare, gray-dusted pavement. It was the safest it had been since the ash first fell. It was also sitting in the shadow of an apocalypse. "The speaker's battery," I said, my eyes flicking to the icon on my laptop screen. "It's at 92%. I don't know how long it will last powering that thing at full volume. An hour, maybe, if we're lucky." That was all it took. The ticking clock snapped us back to reality. This monstrous, beautiful thing was temporary. It was a bridge, but a bridge that was already beginning to burn. "We go now," Mark said, his jaw set. He grabbed the cloth-wrapped crowbar. Sarah nodded, hoisting the straps of her now mostly empty medical bag onto her shoulder. There were no more words. The plan was in motion. I took my place at my station, becoming their eye in the sky. "I'll be watching. I'll text you the battery status every 5%. Move fast, move smooth. Don't look at the vortex for too long. Vertigo is a real risk with low-frequency sounds like that." They gave me a final nod and slipped out of the apartment. The wailing echo in the hallway was gone, its substance vacuumed up and fed to the god in the courtyard. They moved quickly, their path to the stairs now clear. I watched them on the monitor until they disappeared from view. Then I turned my full attention to the window overlooking the courtyard. A moment later, the front door of our building creaked open. Two small figures emerged, dwarfed by the sheer scale of the swirling pillar of dust. The air around them was hazy with displaced particles, and I could see the vibrations from the deep hum making the puddles on the pavement tremble. They moved in a low crouch, following the path I had mapped, their eyes fixed on their goal, the dark, quiet storefront of the corner deli. On my laptop screen, a new message from Sarah. "We're out. The sound, it's inside my head." I typed back instantly. "Keep moving. 88%. The journey across the courtyard was surreal. They were like two astronauts walking on the surface of a new and hostile planet. The only light was the flat, gray twilight of the ashen sky. The only sound was the soul-shaking, bone-deep hum that emanated from everywhere and nowhere at once. The vortex itself was utterly silent, a churning pillar of motion without sound, but the noise it was born from was the entire world. They reached the deli. The glass door was unlocked, pushed slightly ajar. They slipped inside, disappearing from my sight. For the first time, my direct line of sight was broken. I was blind. All I could do was trust them and watch the battery percentage tick down. "We're in," Mark's text came a moment later. "It's a mess. Looking for the supplies now." 81%, I replied. "Be fast." Inside the deli, the world was a still life of interrupted lives. A half-made sandwich sat on the counter, the bread already stale. A child's toy truck lay on its side next to a spilled bag of chips. It was a place of ghosts, but for the first time since the ash fell, it was a place free from monsters. The hum was a dull, vibrating pressure against the walls, a constant reminder of the Leviathan waiting outside. Sarah made a beeline for the small pharmacy section in the back. "The fridge is off," she whispered to Mark, her voice loud in the enclosed space. "But it's been sealed. The insulin should still be viable." She gathered several boxes, her movements quick and efficient, and stuffed them into her bag alongside cooling packs that were now just room temperature. Mark was in the aisles, a silent whirlwind. He grabbed cans of formula, piling them into his arms. He swept bottled water from the shelves, canned beans, protein bars, anything that was sealed and ready to eat. They worked in a state of hyper-focused adrenaline, the constant hum from outside a merciless conductor hurrying them along. It was in the back, by the stockroom door, that Mark saw him. The owner, a kind, portly man named Mr. Henderson. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. From the waist down, he was himself. From the waist up, he was a statue of churning gray ash. On the floor next to him was a dented can of peaches. A small, looping echo, no bigger than a fist, pulsed on his chest, emitting the faint, metallic clink of the dropped can. He hadn't even had time to cry out. Mark felt a wave of nausea, but he pushed it down. There was no time for grief. He turned to rejoin Sarah. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. Got it. All of it. We're coming out. I looked at my laptop. 53%. Plenty of time. Come on home. I watched the deli door, my knuckles white where I gripped my desk. The door opened. They emerged, their arms and bags now laden with supplies. They began the journey back, retracing their steps along the clean, bare pavement. The vortex still churned, a constant, terrifying spectacle. It seemed stable. My plan had worked. A surge of pride, of triumphant relief, washed over me. That was when the hum began to stutter. It was a subtle change at first, a flicker in the deep tone, like a loose connection in a speaker cable. But then it happened again, a longer, more noticeable distortion. The colossal pillar of ash shuddered, its smooth, cyclonic motion becoming ragged and unstable. My eyes shot to the battery icon. It was blinking red, 20%. The power drain was exponential. My estimate had been wildly optimistic. The god was a glutton, and it had drained its offering in a fraction of the time I'd expected. Battery dying, I hammered out the message. It's breaking apart. Run now. In the courtyard, the steady hum died, replaced by a horrifying series of low-frequency pops, groans, and static screeches, the death rattle of the speaker. The effect on the vortex was immediate and catastrophic. It lost all cohesion. The towering pillar did not just collapse, it exploded outwards, not with a bang, but with a silent, roiling wave of pure substance. And it began to calve. From the chaotic, disintegrating mass, smaller shapes were being torn loose. The distorted death screams of the speaker were giving birth to a new wave of horrors. A dozen shrieking, spastic echoes, formless and jagged, were flung from the main body. The safe path was gone. The entire courtyard was instantly transformed into a swarming nest of newborn monsters. Mark and Sarah were halfway across. They broke into a desperate, clumsy sprint, supplies threatening to spill from their arms. One of the new echoes, a screeching, tumbling thing of sharp edges, skittered across the pavement towards them. Mark, look out, Sarah screamed, her voice the first loud, human sound to break the open air. The shriek of her own voice created another echo, a small, fast-moving wisp of ash that erupted from the ground at her feet and lunged for her. Mark reacted instantly, shoving her out of the way and swinging the crowbar in a wide, desperate arc. The crowbar connected with the screeching echo. The sound of the impact, a loud, resonant clang of steel on something unnaturally dense, ripped through the courtyard. And from the point of impact, a third echo, a clang-shaped horror, burst into existence, clinging to the end of his crowbar. They were trapped in a chain reaction, their every action, every attempt to defend themselves, only birthing more threats. They abandoned any attempt at fighting and just ran, weaving through the swarm of chaotic, twitching shapes. I saw Sarah stumble. One of the smaller echoes, a thing born from a pop of static, swiped at her arm. It was a glancing blow, but I saw her sleeve on her left forearm shred instantly, as if touched by acid. She cried out in pain but didn't stop running. They were almost there. 10 feet from the building's entrance, a writhing wall of newly birthed echoes blocked their path. It was over. They were cornered. Suddenly, the front door of the building was thrown open. A figure stood there, Mrs. Gable, the elderly teacher, her face a mask of terror and resolve. In her hands was a small, compressed air horn. "For my husband," she yelled, her voice cracking, and she pressed the button. The horn's shriek was deafening, a sound so loud and piercing it dwarfed everything else. The swarm of echoes in front of Mark and Sarah instantly froze, their attention snapping towards this new dominant sound. In that split second of hesitation, Mark and Sarah dove through the doorway, crashing to the floor of the lobby. Mrs. Gable dropped the horn and slammed the heavy door shut just as the entire swarm converged on it. They were safe. They had made it. Back in my apartment, the aftermath felt like the silence after a bombing. Mark and Sarah were battered, breathing in ragged gasps, but they were alive. The supplies, the precious insulin and formula, were safe. Sarah sat on my floor, her face pale, staring at her left forearm. Where the echo had touched her, her sleeve was gone. Underneath, a patch of skin the size of her hand was a mottled, dead gray. It wasn't bleeding. It wasn't a cut or a burn. The skin had simply stopped being alive. It was flaky, dry, and utterly inert, like the ash itself. We were all staring at it, at the undeniable proof of the ash's touch. It didn't just kill. It converted. We had won. We had our supplies. We had bought ourselves more time. But as I looked out the window at the courtyard, now a writhing ecosystem of dozens of new, complex echoes, I felt a dread colder and deeper than any I had felt before. My plan had been to control the sound, to manipulate the ash's simple reactive nature. But I had been arrogant. I looked at Sarah's dead gray skin. I looked at the swarm of monsters I had helped create. I had subjected the ash to a complex, dying sound wave, and it had responded by breaking apart, by diversifying, by creating a whole new army of horrors. It wasn't just reacting, it was learning. The thought hit me with the force of a physical impact. This wasn't a storm we could wait out. This wasn't a predator we could outsmart. We were not fighting a mindless force of nature. We were trapped in a laboratory. And the ash was not just the experiment, it was the scientist. And every sound we made, every clever plan we devised, was just giving it new data. We weren't surviving, we were teaching it how to kill us better.